Good morning, everybody. Good start to the meeting. Welcome to members of the committee and to the public for the meeting of the Development Management Committee the 13th of March. Just some housekeeping to start off with. In the case of a fire alarm, and we're not expecting a drill today, exit the doors in the building and make your way to the far end of the car park. Toilets are outside the door on the left, water is available outside the door on the right. Remind everybody this is a public meeting, members of the public. We are live webcasting today, so can I please remind members to use their microphones, that includes the chairman, and remember to turn them off when not speaking. Can I also ask councillors and members of the public present today to switch off mobile phones, silence mobile phones. So our items are presented today. The order for each application is as follows. The case officer will present their report. The objector will speak. Any supporter will speak. The parish council representative will speak. And then ward member or members will speak. Council members are able to question each speaker on points of clarity, and can I ask members to restrict that to points of clarity and questions and keep comments and debate until we debate the application. I would first now like to ask officers at the top table to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Amelia Bolter. I'm a Senior Democratic Services Officer and Clerk to this committee. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Pat Weimer. I'm Head of Development Management for South Hams.
I'm Charlotte Harrahane. I'm a Senior Planning Officer and the Case Officer for the first application.
Thank you. And now on to the agenda. Do we have any apologies for today?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've received 2 apologies from Councillors Bonham and Taylor, and Councillors Eadie and Steele are substituting today. Thank you.
Thank you. We have item 1, the minutes of the meeting for the 14th of February 24. Do members agree that those minutes are correct for that meeting? Can I have I was going to ask for a seconder, a proposer and a seconder, but thank you. Item 2, urgent business. There are no items of chair's business today. Item 4, declarations of interest. Members, do you have any declarations of interest on the applications before us today? None. Thank you very much. Public participation, item 5, the list of speakers has been circulated to members, and we now move on to item 6, the planning applications. The first one today is one that was deferred from the last meeting. That's 365023 FUL. The case officer is Charlotte Harrahane. The recommendation was conditional approval subject to a section 106. And can I remind members that when we come to vote on this, only members who were present at the last meeting are able to vote. So those who were not present are unable to vote on this application. We have already gone through all the various presentations, so we're just moving to the officer to update us on the points that it was deferred on. So if I can move on now to Ms. Harrahane. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, as a reminder, this is an application for an additional dwelling in the site at Broome Park at Dartington. So a wider development of 80 dwellings has already been approved and is under construction, and this is for an additional dwelling within the red line that you can see here. So as Councillor Long said, this application was deferred from the February committee to allow the applicant to give further consideration regarding the market discount rate. They have confirmed that the discount rate will remain at 80% of the open market rate, and that is what members should consider today. The applicant has provided a statement which I will read because they've already had their chance to speak. So this is the statement that's been provided by the applicant. We were surprised by the deferral of the application at the last committee and have carefully considered the deferral reasons. In relation to the level of discount, we are not able to reduce this from 80%. We recognise the importance of affordable housing, and we have a track record of delivering additional affordable housing on our sites in the South Hams wherever possible. At Totnes, we specifically responded to the housing officer's request for a disabled affordable bungalow to be provided, and we have voluntarily submitted a fresh planning application to provide this. At Dartmouth, we have provided a further 32 affordable homes over the 83 required under the terms of our Section 106 agreements. The council's declared housing crisis is real, and the public and private sector need to work together to address this. There are currently 34 households on the housing needs register in Dartington, which does not capture those who need a shared ownership or discount market property. As previously advised, the site at Broome Park is already delivering 30% affordable homes across the site, which comprise 24 affordable rent and shared ownership homes. This additional plot presents a one-off opportunity to provide an additional affordable home of a different tenure on the site. There is somebody who would benefit from this property who would otherwise be seeking a Section 106 shared ownership unit, perhaps blocking someone with lower affordability. The land is not free because there would be a diminution in value of 3 open market homes. Unfortunately, anything less than 80%, the associated costs do not make it financially viable, and hence we can't secure the necessary funding from our bank. It is notable that the financial saving for the purchaser of this unit would be greater than the financial contribution that would be secured by the council towards affordable housing provision from an application for an open market unit. In response to the request for the inclusion of some trees within the application site, the site plan has been updated to include 2 trees, a cherry and apple tree, as well as bat, bird and bee boxes. We hope that you would approve the scheme because it's a genuine chance to provide an additional affordable home for a local person in need of a home. So that is the update statement from the applicant. And as discussed by members at the last committee, additional information has been provided by way of this plan. I'll just go in a bit closer to show some additional tree planting and biodiversity measures, so bat, bird and bee stuff. So just as a reminder for members, the other matters, there was no impact to trees, drainage, highways. The low carbon development matters proposed are acceptable. Neighbour amenities not considered an issue. We've had parish council support, no objections from statutory consultees and 1 objection. And the application was recommended for conditional approval subject to the completion of a 106. And that's the update.
Thank you, Ms. Harahane. Do I have any questions of Ms. Harahane from members on this? Councillor Hodgson.
Has the applicant been asked what they expect the house actual price to be? So in other words, what's the 100% on that? Because I'm aware that recently on one of the sales for off plan for one of the sites was, I think it was 1.1 million, which is one of the very close by houses, I think number 76, which somehow seems to have managed to gain an extra parking space as well for its sale. So there's kind of some questions going on about what's going on, and is this house this property likely to be in the same kind of category of price? Because no way is 80% of that affordable.
No, we haven't asked. We wouldn't normally ask about sort of market prices. We do have Alex here from the affordable housing team if you've got any sort of specific questions about the rates and things like that and costs. But no, as part of the plan application, we haven't asked for that information.
So has no viability assessment been presented for this at all?
No, because it's policy compliant, so we can't ask for viability.
At this point,
I don't think it is policy compliant because the policy was 80 houses.
So I did go over this last time. So the allocation for the site was estimated 80. As I said to members last time, our policy officer has confirmed that they don't prescribe maximum figures. And so 81 rather than 80 is within the acceptable range. And with this dwelling, the site would still have 30% affordable housing. So yeah, it would be policy compliant.
I think at this point I'll bring in Ms. Rihag to give us an update, more information.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson, we've had an estimated open market value of the property of around about £450,000. That would be the open market value. So it's not in the ballpark of the 1 point something million.
If I could ask Beck then, so if that property is then found to be for sale for considerably more at the affordable level, do we have any leverage to pull this back in any capacity?
The definition in the NPPF for an affordable unit, they're all listed out for social rent, affordable rent, discount market rent. It does say in the NPPF that it should be a minimum of 20%. And the applicant is at least 20%, sorry, that's the actual wording. So the applicants are actually providing that 20% discount on that unit. So there'd be no leverage for us to claw anything back there.
Sorry, if I just be absolutely clear here, if they actually put it on the market for a lot more than that, do we have any powers to sort of say, well, the decision today was taken on the basis of that price being cited? Does that form part of the record of this meeting, so that if there's a variation in 6 months' time, we can say, well, you know, we could perhaps claw back the difference, you know, towards other affordable housing or something. But you know, it seems that, you know, there's so many new variations come in on applications, so that we get, you know, we end up down this road where we end up where we didn't intend to start from the start. I just wonder what leverage we have to ensure that that is the actual price that it would go for affordable, so nobody who makes the decision today is hoodwinked in any way, shall I say.
We can't secure what the asking price for that property is. I mean, the market will be what the market will be, and as we know, it's been quite volatile over the last 3 to 4 years. So the actual price of that property, when it comes to marketing it, could dramatically reduce. We don't know we haven't got a crystal ball to see what that's going to be in the future. So,
Councillor Hodgson, I think the answers have been given to your sort of questions there. Any other questions of the officers? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Just for my information, so is this done on the basis of when it comes to market, it's valued independently and 80% of that value is taken?
generally what happens with a discount market unit is we ask the applicant, whoever that is, to provide us with 2 valuations from an estate agent. The council would decide on which the most appropriate level was, and that would all be secured within the Section 106. We would then, as a council, have to approve who was purchasing that unit, that they didn't have any other option on the open market. So we do have a little bit of we can make sure that that value hasn't been inflated, if you see what I mean, by different estate agents.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Councillor Steele.
So, would you see this as if this was at 80%, would you see this as a help to you as a housing officer? Is it beneficial to the overall picture?
We know it's extremely expensive to live within the South Hams, and there are people that are asset rich and cash poor. They're not in appropriate housing. They're in large units that you can't adapt for their needs. They haven't got the money to be able to do that. There will be somebody who needs this property who's got a local connection to the area. So it's not going to take anybody off of our housing register, but the people, which is Devon Home Choice, but the people that are seeking shared ownership, discount market sale properties wouldn't be on there anyway. They would generally be on what was the government's Help to Buy register. So it will help somebody, and it will cause a churn within the housing stock.
Any other questions of the officer? No? Then we'll move into the debate on this application. Does anybody wish to start the debate? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. My concern here, as more than anything else, is that we're on a slippery slope with developers that come in, and we know that we've had challenges with some of the larger developments that have come in, and we're creating fairly tight suburbia in many places. The community of Dartington that I represent have consistently objected to these large developments right in the heart of Dartington itself. And I know we're only talking about one house today, and I know the sort of apparently the carrot that's being dangled here is that it's so-called affordable. 450 grand is not affordable to many, many people that we need to try and help to find accommodation in this area. Many of us will have received the housing list that got circulated yesterday by one of the housing team in South Hams, and you know there's very little in this area. So people who want to live and thrive and work in this area, they're really up against it to find that kind of money or to get a mortgage on that kind of money, and with interest rates as they are, it's really, really challenging. And I think sometimes we have to hold a line here to say that if you know what's coming forward is what we need. This is not meeting our local housing needs, unfortunately. As much as I hear what our housing officer is saying, and I absolutely respect that position, I think it's a fair position. But you know, as councillors, we can be a little bit more outspoken on these matters. And when we see something that we don't think is right, we can say so. And I don't think this is right. I know it's going to be hard to challenge, and I know it might end up in appeal. But, you know, when I was sitting at the parish council, and I said this at the last meeting, I sat there and I listened to the applicant saying, oh, this was a piece of land that wasn't for anything else. And I looked at the design and access statement, and it wasn't. It was 3 other houses, back gardens that have been scooped up and reallocated to create quite a, you know, if we could go back to the slide which shows the layout of this, it's there. So you've got, you know, there's houses all around with small gardens. Look at the space around this place. Look at the number of parking spaces it's got. It's, you know, this is quite a luxury home. And I would have thought if somebody was genuinely wanting to allocate more affordable housing on this particular position, they could easily have put 2 semis in there and made a couple of genuinely much more affordable housing than one, you know, relatively luxury home. And I think that we're just being hoodwinked here, that it's actually just about making more money out of a site that already, the land holding value is already there. And I just feel it's wrong to approve this, because what's going to come back next week is another little corner that's been nicked out, and then another and another. And all the time, one thing we are losing is actually the natural sponge. And I'm dealing a lot of the time with flooding at Week, which is sort of to one side of where this is, which is lower. Unfortunately, the drainage officer used to say that it was Week was higher than these 2 sites, and it's not. It's lower. Week, this very ancient hamlet, is being flooded. And the more we interfere with the drainage on this open site here, which is immediately above, the more I think we put Week at risk. So I think there's a lot of reasons for us to say no to this. And for me, it'd be on drainage, not genuinely affordable housing, and also overdevelopment of the site. That's my proposal, and I've actually proposed objection, refusal.
Thank you. We have Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. The fault here lies with central government housing policy, and what we have on that plan is a perception that a truth that garden sizes are being reduced, but they're being reduced to within the policy that is acceptable by our JLP. So that this is an opportunity for housing, which I'm sure the builders are not going to suffer from, but and the fact that it's the affordable price is just a bizarre system, is not something that we can control here. I voted to abstain against the deferment last time, and it was an interesting action to try last month on would they be able to work with a greater discount than they're offering. But that's never really been within our control, except that we set a minimum. I am in disagreement that I would stop having housing. We are used to infill housing. This is infill housing at an early stage, but we do infill housing elsewhere in our towns. I don't know where we are on, because there's been a proposal. Can there be a proposal the other way?
I was, as you had come in and Councillor Hodgson sort of came in early and you'd signalled I was letting you speak and then I was going to go back.
So I'll just wait then. But you can see which way I'm going.
Thank you. Are there any other members wish to speak? We have a proposal from Councillor Hodgson for refusal. Do we have a seconder for that?
Can I second even though I was not at the... No.
Oh, sorry, no. Can I, is there anybody who is able to vote on this willing to second? If not, and I don't see that, unfortunately, Councillor Hodgson, your proposal falls, so to speak, and I will come back to Councillor Abbott.
I propose that we go along with the officer recommendation and accept this new build.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Do we have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Steele, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this proposal, this application? I can't see any movements. I will then take it, move to take it to the vote that we have a proposer and seconder to accept the officer's recommendation of conditional approval subject to the completion of the section 106. And can I remind that the only people who can vote are Councillor Abbott, Councillor Carson, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Long, Councillor Nix, Councillor Steele and Councillor Rake. Can I have a show of hands for those in accepting the recommendation of the officer of conditional approval? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. And those against?
So it's 6. It's 1.
Thank you. So that application has been approved, recommended for approval, subject to the 106 completion. Thank you, members. Ooh. Thank you, members. If we can. Just make sure that we haven't got any feedback in the room. Thank you, members, for that change. We're just waiting for that changeover of officers. We now go to agenda item 6B, which is 304821 FUL, which is the property or the area Montgo, Magdalen Road, Totnes. Case officer is Peter Whitehead. The recommendation is conditional approval. Mr. Whitehead, if you'd like to take over, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is an application for a single dwelling house. Members may recall, some members may recall, this application was brought before committee in 2022 with a recommendation of approval, but was deferred at that time for reasons relating to land ownership and the accuracy of the red line denoting the application site, and also a few issues relating to site drainage. We've since received revised plans and details that resolve these points, and the application is thus brought back before you for determination with the original report, plus, as you will see, a detailed update. Members will note from the report a number of objections from local residents on a range of issues. Members will also note the site has some planning history, with permission for a dwelling granted on the same site in 2016 and a second application for a dwelling refused in 2020. Site history is a material consideration, and I'll cover this in my presentation. So this is the application site outlined in thick red line. You'll see it's in Magdalen Road, just to the northwest of Ashley. Could you not? So it's this, I'm identifying with the cursor there, so it's this roughly rectangular site. At the bottom, so the north, at the bottom of Ashley's garden, it was historically part of the same plot, has a frontage onto Magdalen Road here. You'll see Magdalen Cottages on the opposite side of the road. They are a pair of semi-detached houses. It was identified at the site meeting that whilst they might read as bungalows in the street scene, and I'll show you some photographs later, they are in fact two-storey houses, but they're built into sloping land, so therefore from Magdalen Road itself they read a single storey. Garfield Place, I'll show you some photographs again, is a 19th century terrace. On the other side of the road there is more modern housing, so it's a very mixed street of houses. Again, I think some of the photographs will show that, and members who are at the site visit will also have seen that too. So this is Google Maps, doesn't really pick out the site. On here it's this area of trees and shrubs on to the south side of Magdalen Road. Again, you can see the two-storey houses, Magdalen Cottages 1 and 2, and terraced housing of sort of 19th century, late 19th century origin on the north side of the road. Some more modern 20th century housing in the vicinity as well. Just before I move on, we're not in the conservation area here. The conservation area boundary, which takes in the Leach Well, is to the sort of northwest, broadly in line with the sort of northwest elevation of Magdalen Cottages. So we are not within it. It's not far away, but it's far enough away in our view such that it's not an issue that impacts upon our consideration of this application. And that's been true of the Council's consideration of earlier applications for this site, I might add. So this is the site plan. This is the block plan, which shows the site area outlined in red. You'll see that the footprint of the dwelling broadly takes up a large part of the site. This is the front elevation facing onto Magdalen Road. As you can see, it's a 3-storey dwelling with a flat roof, contemporary design. Flat roof has been proposed to provide roof terrace. There's no outdoor amenity space, or very little space around the periphery of the building to provide for amenity purposes. So the solution here is to provide it in the form of 2 roof terraces. The one to the right-hand side obviously is higher up, slightly higher up. The one to the left-hand side has a glazed roof over it to provide for some shelter, but also that's part of the drainage scheme, which I'll explain in due course. These are the side elevations. You'll see it's of a contemporary design, as I say, with a flat roof. What is also notable, and again members will have realised this from the site visit, is that the building is built into a fairly steeply rising bank. And this is the rear elevation to Ashley. So this gives you a feel for what the dwelling would look like in the street scene. As you'll see from the elevations, the front elevation is broken up. first and second floor pulls forward. The ground floor is recessed to allow for car parking at the front. You'll see there's a car park there. There's also a single garage, which I'll show you on the floor plans. Materials are mainly render to the elevations. The walls facing onto Magdalen Road, which is shown in sort of a silver colour here, they are proposed to be stone faced. So this is the floor plan. Again, you can see a car park, so there's space to the frontage for at least one vehicle. Top left-hand corner is a garage, integral garage. Then you've got a hall and a utility, ground floor. First floor, bedrooms, 3-bedroom property with ensuite and bathroom. Second floor, lounge and dining, plus the amenity space, which has got the glazed roof over, and then finally the roof terrace at the top. So overall, we've got an amenity space, roughly 100 square metres. And I would also note that the sort of the two-storey part of the building is set back about 3 to 4 metres from the road. This is the property that was refused permission in 2020. I'll touch on this in my presentation further, but you'll see it's again of contemporary design, but of different massing, different design. I'll go through the reasons for refusal in more detail in my summing up. But as I say, different design, and it was also sited closer to the road, which was a concern at the time. So this is the site. Difficult to pick out when we were at the site visit exactly what the boundaries of the site are, because it's, as I say, set into rising ground and somewhat overgrown, but it's roughly rectangular, and as I say, extends up to Ashley's garden at the top. Ashley, you can see just at the top there with a sort of a barrel roof. That's again a property of contemporary design. Doesn't read in the same street scene as Magdalen Road, but you can see the roof of it there. There's also, you can see a fence which is broadly in line with the back of the plot. We can talk about that as well in terms of the site boundaries and how they'll be treated. Another picture of the site. That's a property called Crossways, which you can see at the top right-hand side. Again, looking into the plot, you can see a remnant wall here. This will be removed as part of the development. Again, looking along Magdalen Road, the sort of outbuilding you can see on the right-hand side, that's just about where the conservation area boundary is. Another one of the same site. This is the opposite side of the road. I said it's a kind of a mixed street scene. There's certainly nothing of contemporary design like they proposed before you this morning, but it is a fairly mixed street scene. There are properties of 19th century origin. These terraces that run all the way down, very, very attractive 19th century terraces, but also more modern buildings on the opposite side of the road, which is just down from the application site. These are the two-storey properties, numbers 1 and 2 Magdalen Cottages. From the street, they certainly read as bungalows, but they are in fact 2 stories. The ground dropping away on the far side, so they have a sort of 2-storey elevation to the opposite side. Again, another picture of the same street scene. That's the picture of what it's showing you. So in terms of key issues then, there are a number of issues set out in detail in the officer's report and touched on as well in the addendum. First of all, principle of development. It's in the main town. Totnes is one of our tier 1 settlements. So as far as we're concerned, the principle of development is firmly established. It's a sustainable location in our view within walking distance of the town centre. So in principle, a site where we should be encouraging development. I would note that the earlier refusal in 2020 wasn't on grounds of principle. That wasn't a reason for refusal. And as I would say, there was an earlier approval in 2016 as well. In terms of a design, scale and landscape, as I say, the site is just outside the conservation area. It's fair to say there's nothing like this in street scene terms, but as I say, it is a mixed street scene, and the guidance and policies that we've referred to in the report do allow for contemporary design and innovative forms of design and we are happy that a property of this type can be accommodated within the street scene. In terms of its presence in the street scene, I think it's fair to say as well that the flat roof reduces the dominance of the building. It's set into a slope which also reduces its presence, and there is the opportunity for some limited landscaping to either side, again to further reduce its impact. In terms of height, there was a comment made by the chairman about the height of the property in relation to Magdalen Road, and I think it's just worth sort of referring back to one of these photographs. So from ground level, from the road level, the property is roughly 9 metres tall, which takes us, I believe, to just about the top of the fence here. So if we then look at the section through, so yeah, that's quite useful. So roughly, so the green at the back of the property is roughly where the fence is of the garden to Ashley. We are roughly at that height. I'll talk about boundary treatments later on, but at the moment, what is shown here as a roof terrace. There we go. So if you can see the roof terrace at the back, this is what's shown as amenity space, 60 square metres. This roof terrace effectively then opens out onto the raised terrace at the back of Ashley. So there will need to be some form of means of enclosure at the back. But in terms of height, it's broadly in line with the back of Ashley's garden. You'll see from the parapet that it's just a little bit higher than that. There we go. So that's the back of Ashley's garden, and we are roughly a metre higher than that, which is consistent with the sort of metre high fence that's there at the moment, in my estimation. In terms of neighbour amenity, a couple of points which are covered in the officer's report and indeed are raised as concerns by members of the public. As I said, the two-storey part of the building is set back about 3 to 4 metres from the front boundary of the site. So the property isn't imposing on the street; it's recessed a bit. In terms of overbearing impact, the earlier application was refused in 2020 for one of the reasons was the impact upon the properties opposite, the feeling that there would be some loss of outlook by virtue of the scale of the building. What we have in this application, the building is now recessed further back into the site, 3 to 4 metres back into the site, whereas it was about 1.5 metres before. And I think in terms of our consideration, we're also mindful that the properties opposite, the application site is not facing the properties opposite, it's almost facing the recess between them, which is broadly sort of shown on this plan. So we are comfortable that there will not be any material loss of outlook or overbearing impact by virtue of the sort of scale and proximity of the property. I think in terms of our SPD, it's also relevant to point out that we allow for properties to be 15 metres apart, and this is broadly in line with that guidance. The second issue of neighbour amenity, which we need to carefully consider, is overlooking. And again, in terms of overlooking and privacy, our SPD is normally looking at a separation distance between properties of something between 21 metres minimum or greater distance, 28 metres for 3-storey dwellings. That's something obviously to take account of. In this case, those distances are not met, but I think there are a number of mitigating factors which, in our view, justify us concluding that there will not be any material impact upon privacy. First one really is what I've just said, is that the property is situated in a gap between the two dwellings, numbers 1 and 2 there, 1 Garfield Place and 2 Magdalen Cottages. So there isn't any direct overlooking, in our view, into the windows. I think the second point I'd note is that our SPD, which talks about privacy, is primarily looking at the privacy in private zones of people's properties. So if you think about a standard pair of houses that face each other, it's about trying to protect the privacy of people's rear gardens and the rear windows of properties. Here we have a situation which is a more conventional front-to-front relationship with houses facing each other across a street. And there is already, in our view, reasonable overlooking of those front elevations of those properties from the street. So that's what we're judging it against. It's a conventional front-to-front relationship. So in our view, reasonable privacy is afforded to 1 and 2, or to put it another way, this proposal will not materially affect the level of privacy we think it's reasonable that they should enjoy to their front elevations. With regard to Crossways, if you look at the properties then to the rear of the site, we've got Ashley and Crossways in particular. What is proposed is a balcony, a parapet around the roof terrace, which would, in theory, allow some overlooking of Crossways and Ashley. What will be required, and we have a condition in the officer's report, is some form of boundary treatment to conventional screen fence, if you like, to prevent any overlooking between those properties. And that is part of our recommendation. So in terms of impact upon neighbours, we are content that the application meets the requirements of policies Dev 1 and Dev 2. If we then move on to highways and parking, so as I say, what we have is 2 parking spaces to serve the property, 1 in the garage, 1 on the front. It's a central location within the town. Certainly, for a 3-bedroom property like this, 2 parking spaces are in our view, perfectly adequate and meet the requirements of the SPD in terms of our parking standards. As you will have noticed at the site visit, Magdalen Road, very narrow. The parking is highly restricted. It's a residence parking area, so there is limited parking available on street. There are concerns raised in representations that cars will poke out. They won't, there will be obstruction of the road, etc., etc. But the spaces do measure up and meet our standards, and there is no objection from County Highways, and therefore we are content with the highways and parking arrangements. Drainage was raised as a concern with regards to the application in 2022, which is one of the primary reasons it was deferred. And that relates to drainage onto the road, really. There is a drain that runs down the road, which County Highways were uncomfortable with the applicants using. So what they've looked at is an alternative arrangement. If you look at the red line here, this is a combined sewer that runs through from Crosswinds, through Ashley, and then down the road. What they are now proposing, rather than relying upon the road, the drain in Magdalen Road itself, is an arrangement which is shown here. Complicated arrangement, but I'll take you through it. In essence, all surface water from the house will now drain into the sewer, which is in Ashley's garden. The red line, which you can see to the bottom left-hand side of this slide, shows a surface water drainage connection, or a drainage connection for foul and surface water that has already been provided, and that connection is on the application site. There is no off-site work therefore required. That connection already exists. The roof terrace, which has got a glass roof over it, will drain into this, and all other surface water that falls on the house will drain into this. The only other rainwater that will not drain into this is the car park, obviously at ground floor, which will have permeable paving. And our drainage officers are happy with this arrangement, and indeed so are South West Water. So this hopefully overcomes the difficulty. All foul will also go into the combined sewer with being pumped. So there's a pump system for this. Right, land stability. So again, this is an issue we discussed on site on Monday. As you will have seen, it's a heavily sloping site, and have been concerns about stability of the site in the past. When we're looking at planning applications, we need to tread a fairly careful line in terms of how we as planners and how we as a local planning authority assess land stability, because there are different regimes and different regulations, obviously, that cover what we as planners deal with and what is dealt with under other legislation. The application is accompanied by a preliminary ground investigation report, which has been assessed by us. There is national guidance in the NPPF, or national policy in the NPPF, which states that the responsibility for securing safe development where land is affected by land stability issues rests with the developer and/or landowner. There is also complementary guidance in the NPPG that sets out that LPA should require an applicant to provide a preliminary assessment and consider whether risks can be mitigated to an acceptable level. So in this case, we do have a preliminary ground investigation report that sets out various stabilisation measures that could be incorporated, and importantly does not indicate that the site cannot be satisfactorily stabilised. As I noted at the site meeting, approval under the building regulations would be required to build the dwelling, not just planning permission. So you've got two different regimes here, and it's a matter of deciding how far we can go and then leave the building regulations to take over. So our role, in our view, is to satisfy ourselves that the site can be safely developed, not in the final analysis to consider the fine detail of the building's construction. So the officer's recommendation and condition treads a careful line between seeking reasonable compliance with national policy and guidance, but leaving the fine detail to be agreed by engineers and building inspectors. And you'll see that we have recommended condition 3, which seeks submission of the stabilisation scheme to give us confidence that it has been approved, but we are not going to be looking at the fine detail of that and approving it as a planning authority. The final point I just wanted to cover is the early refusal in 2020. It's a material consideration, and we are bound to consider whether ultimately this application has overcome the reasons for refusal, and hopefully that gives us some confidence that with the officer's recommendation of approval before you as well. So the early refusal was on 4 grounds. First of all, there wasn't any outdoor space. It was a 3-storey dwelling. Well, it was insufficient outdoor space. It was a 3-storey dwelling with a pitched roof. There was a small terrace, but not adequate outdoor space for a 3-bedroom property. We now have roof terraces that provide 100 square metres of outdoor space in accordance with our guidance. So it ticks that box, overcomes that reason for refusal in our view. The second reason for refusal was overdevelopment of the plot. It was deemed to be town cramming. And again, that comes on partly on the basis of them providing insufficient garden space, the house crammed onto the plot with very little space around it. This one now, as you will see from the officer's report, the plot coverage is slightly less. And at the same time, we've managed to provide, or the applicants have managed to provide, adequate garden space. As well, the property is recessed onto the plot. So overall, we're satisfied that it's acceptable. It is not an overdevelopment. The functional requirements of the house are met: garden space and parking, and there is scope for some limited landscaping to the site boundaries. Land stability again was a reason for refusal last time. We've weighed it up against the national policy and the national guidance. We think what is proposed now is reasonable. And there was also concern about the design and impact upon neighbours, overbearing impact specifically. As I said, the earlier refusal, the dwelling was close to the road, and I think there was evidence that it would therefore have been overbearing upon the properties opposite. Now the dwelling's been set back, and we think that relationship is acceptable. Finally, in the last application, there was no evidence of compliance with DEV 32, whereas there is now. What is being proposed, as you'll note from the officer's report, is a passive house, so high quality insulation, triple glazed windows, mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, and so on. EV charging, which is also proposed to be secured by condition. It's a sustainable location as well, so which will also minimise car use. So overall, we believe the application now before you overcomes the reasons for refusal, and as you will note, our recommendation is one of conditional approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Members, do you have any questions of Mr. Whitehead? I'll take Councillor Panel first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could you go back to the Site plan, please. Yeah, the location plan, the very early one. With the red square, yeah, the red square, which to my mind looks different to the square that's on the document in front of us. Is there a reason for that? That looks more like a square. This looks more like a rectangle with an angle on it as well. Is there a reason for the discrepancy?
You're comparing these two?
No, I'm comparing it with the location plan on the document in front of us.
On the officer's report.
Yes, I'm trying to see what page number it is.
Yeah,
The very first page.
Yeah, I mean that's the one on the officer's report is probably the redlined location plan, which was on the 2020 report.
Right.
Which has been updated, as I mentioned. There was some discussion about land ownership.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I believe has been corrected.
So that explains why that's been amended, and that what you're showing us now.
That is that's the
correct
current plan. My predecessor, Chloe Allen, who had this application, yes, there was some discussion about the red line. There was sight of the land registry plan, which I believe overcomes that particular discrepancy.
That's fine. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there an illustration where the previous application that came before from which this committee deferred it to show the comparisons in terms of, particularly I'm thinking about that profile along the street in terms of how much the massing and the height. So if there's a kind of what would it be, west or east? Yeah. So is there one that shows what the previous one looks like compared to that?
The application that was refused.
Yeah. But there isn't one that kind of
like
overlays one on the other.
Well, not on top of one another. No, I mean the two elevations that you can see to the right of this slide are the side views. It's a different design of property. I mean, I think for me, I mean there are this proposal now is recessed further into the site, which I think reduces the building's prominence a little bit more than before. But yeah, there isn't a direct comparison.
And a further question in terms of public consultation, I noticed that this says that the town council's last comment, I think, was last spring. But these new drawings, I understand it, have come forward since then. Has it been reconsulted on? Because obviously the town council would be looking at, particularly since their neighbourhood plan has been adopted.
I understand it has. I mean, there was when the red line was corrected and there were drainage plans, I believe a new reconsultation was carried out.
Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for them to talk. So, can I have a look at the? Yeah. So, first of all, on the idea of pumping sewage uphill, is this a common? No, it doesn't matter. Is this a working practice elsewhere?
Yeah, well, yes, it is, Councillor. I mean, there are pumping stations of various scales. Well, some whole estates are served by pumped sewage,
right?
And it is a tried and tested method for sites like this.
Okay. On the sorry,
can I just add to that whilst I absolutely agree with Mr. Whitehead that the situation does exist elsewhere. We've both been involved with sites where that was the only solution, but it would also be fair to say from our internal drainage engineer's perspective, a pump system would be one of last resort.
The connection with the red line into the existing sewer, is that anything to do with us as a planning concern because it's not within the red line boundary of the application.
As I said, the red line that's shown outside the application site, that connection is already exists. So that's been provided. So we have at the moment a point in the corner of the application site. If you see where the red line goes to that corner, there is a connection point there. So no development is proposed now outside the application site because that sewer pipe already exists.
I think this is my last. The permeable paving, are there gradations of permeability so that we can be assured that the amount of water falling on the paving could get through if the, what about the land underneath it? If that's impervious, it doesn't make any difference.
I take your point. I mean, I haven't got the details of the drainage report in front of me, but it has been poured over by our own drainage engineer and found acceptable. The big thick black line you can see there, that is impermeable. So there is no way that the water can pour onto the highway.
Well, that would depend upon height of the water.
Well, but that. As I say, this application has been poured over by a drainage engineer. Is quite happy with the arrangements now proposed. Thanks.
Members, any other questions? Councillor Steele.
Thank you. So with the process for the stabilisation works, where we've got just on the bottom of page 26, 27, so it's a precondition, a pre-commencement condition to be imposed. A detailed site stabilisation scheme is composed and carried out. So does that then come back to you once that's done to say, oh, is that completely out of our hands?
The condition, as I said, the condition as worded requires the submission of that scheme to us to give us some confidence that it has been done, and then the development can then commence or be continued thereafter. It isn't a condition that requires us to approve it. It is trusting that a competent person would design such a scheme, and that a structural engineer or whatever would be commissioned to do such a report.
Great. Okay, but we do make
but
sure.
As I say, the final construction is normally dealt with under the building regulations. In this case, given its land stability, we are asking for some oversight and some confidence that there is a practical solution, but we aren't asking for the fine detail and seeking to approve that fine detail. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, then thank you, Mr. Whitehead. We'll move on to the objector, Mr. Town. If you'd like to come up, you have 3 minutes from when you've got once you've settled in. If you'd like to say that when you've settled down and put your microphone on, if you can switch your microphone on.
Okay.
Thank you. If you'd like to start, Mr. Town.
I live directly opposite the site in question. That's my car. That's my house, and the same picture either way. Basically, this proposal is too big for the site. It's cramming things in one way and another. For example, the distance from the frontage of the proposed building to my house is less than what I understand to be the recommended distance for in planning housing purposes. It more or less fits in, but not quite, and that I think is effectively the case for much of what is being proposed here. It's just too big, back to front, and equally in height, it's far too high. It also is totally out of keeping with the rest of the area. Magdalen Road, probably most of you know it. My house is fairly modern, but otherwise down left-hand side of the road, looking downhill, late Victorian standard, very pleasant housing. To the right of the right-hand side of the road, the uphill side, standing much further back than this property, are a range of more modern designs, but they stand well away from the road. This does neither of those things, and in that sense, it intrudes. Whether the ground above has been properly stabilised, I am by no means sure. I just hear gossip, including gossip from a friend who's a professor of civil engineering who lives just at the top of the hill. We may have a site. The site was originally cut away by a rather dodgy developer who hoped to fit something in there. Nothing was ever done to achieve proper site stability, and I fear that that may still be the case. But fundamentally, this house just would not fit in. We can talk endlessly about the size of the rooms, and the windows, and so on. Does not fit in with the rest of the area. It is an eyesore, and it will be recognised as such for years to come. At least I hope it won't. It won't be there.
Mr. Town, you did make a comment about a dodgy developer, and I think if you can clarify that you're not referring to the current applicants.
No, I don't think I am.
Thank you.
I think we're probably aware of who the dodgy development might be collectively, but I don't think it's an issue now.
You'd like to continue with your comments?
Well, there's not a great deal more to say, except that this building should not be here. Look, you've got a totally different design in terms of the aesthetics, if that's the right word, of the Magdalen Road and the housing on it. And it's standing in a very prominent position. If you go back a few pictures, very prominent position as you drive up Magdalen Road from the bottom. This will be staring you almost in the face. It is totally out of keeping. It'd also be very difficult to develop in that to build. There's no space for building for storage of materials, etc., etc. And there will be ongoing battles, I suppose, between people having a parking space taken over by a builder. We're gone next week, mate.
Thank you, Mr. Town. You've had your 3 minutes.
Okay.
I'll ask members whether any of the committee members have any question of Mr. Town. Councillor Rake.
Thank you. Thank you for coming along this morning, Mr. Town. I'm just trying to understand your last point that this will be, as you drive up Magdalen Road, this will be staring you right in the face, because I would have thought that you'd just see the corner of it. It's set back from the road, and there's banking that carries on downhill of it. So I'm sure you're right, but I just wouldn't have been what I would have thought from the site visit.
I think you have a rather optimistic picture. Sorry, not you personally, but whoever created that was rather optimistic as about what it wouldn't show. The ground, okay, to the left here, that is below where the new house would stand. The new house would rise up to the just above the black stuff on the picky, and would be visible right the way down the road. And because we have a house which is of, shall we say, modern design, as opposed to the classic stuff we mostly live in, it would be rather noticeable, not in a terribly pleasant way.
Thank you, Mr. Town. Any other questions of Mr. Town? If not, thank you for your time. Thank you. If you'd like to switch off your microphone. Thank you.
I hope I don't have to invite you to my openings, to any openings.
Thank you, Mr. Town.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Town. Appreciate that. If we can move on to the supporter, Ms. Burden. you, Ms Burden, you know the form.
Thank you. Good morning, members. As you know from the site meeting at Mongo on Monday, this case has been ongoing for some time, and I know the applicants and the neighbours will be pleased to draw it to a close. The site was purchased by my clients as a building plot from the owners of Ashley with a consent from 2016 for a single dwelling. As you heard from the officer, due to conflicting views from the drainage and highways, the applicants were unable to discharge the conditions at that time to start the development, so the planning consent then lapsed. We then undertook a pre-application with Lucy Hall in 2021 to seek advice and resolve the issues and to seek SHDC views on the design and details. This new design has been proposed that sits well on the site, meets the national space standards for a 3-bedroom detached dwelling and provides sufficient amenity space as well as parking for 2 guards, including a garage. The dwelling has been orientated to look through the gap between the Victorian houses and the adjacent houses and has been set back so to not to be overbearing on either. It is at a lower level to the more contemporary dwellings which are at a higher level on Kingsbridge Hill. The dwelling is of a contemporary design set back into the bank with spaces for 2 cars underneath. There are no objections from highways. The Totnes Neighbourhood Plan Policy V1 supports innovative design and creativity in design, which we consider this dwelling delivers. The application is supported by the Town Council, who requested a double yellow line along the frontage. The drainage is to go into a combined sewer, which was provided by the previous owner with an existing connection at the back of the site. The drainage department are happy and with support from South West Water too. Plans have been checked against land registry plans and the applicant will work within the party wall agreement to build the dwelling on the site and to complete the ground stabilisation works as detailed in the geotech report that is required by condition. The dwelling height will be at the same level as the rear bank and will therefore be built into the bank, but there is ample space around the build to deliver planting, landscaping and biodiversity enhancement. The dwelling will be constructed, as you've heard, under Passive House standards and will have an EV charging point. The site, as you know, is in a sustainable location in Totnes in a residential street and will deliver a 3-bedroom home. We welcome the conditions that have been suggested and hope members who will follow the recommendation from the officer and support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Burden. Members, any questions? No? Thank you. Move on. We do not have any statement or comments from Totnes Town Council, and I understand none of the ward members wish to speak at this point. So we will.
Sorry, Chairman, with your indulgence, I thought it might be worthwhile clarifying what I see as the position of the County Council following Councillor Hodgson's question earlier. I've gone back through the public website, and as far as I can see, the Town Council were consulted at least 4 times because we've had 4 responses back over the time over that period, and the last comment I can find online was dated the 21st of March last year, which basically said no further comments to the comments put previously. So as far as I'm aware, yes, the Town Council have been reconsulted at the times there have been changes to the plans. I just thought that would be useful to clarify this point at this point.
So the actual design that we're looking at today has been looked at by the Town Council last March, is what you're saying? There's been no change of design since then?
The design of the house has not changed, no. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Mr Town, you've passed your comments. Thank you. Can we, as we do not have, we'll move into the debate on this application. Does anybody wish to? We are moving to debate because the ward members have not indicated they wish to speak on this. So if we move into the debate on this, does anybody have any comments on this? Councillor Abbott?
I'd just like to say that the concept of modernity not fitting into the modern world is one that is forever changing, because we're always reaching a new time in life, and a 60s build was very modern compared to the 1800s in the past, and this is another new style, and it's always challenging to have a new build in your area, and I don't think that that's a crucial issue. That's my point.
Any other comments from members? Councillor Councillor Hodgson first and Councillor Powell.
Thank you. The Totnes Neighbourhood Plan came into force about 4 months ago. It was finally adopted through referendum. And the applicant's agent has cited point policy V1, which is local identity. But part A of that says, respecting a local distinctiveness and historic character in land use, scale, form and appearance. The ENV policy, part C, says its scale and character will be in keeping with the site and surroundings. EN1 part D says it will maintain or enhance local identity and distinctiveness. When we were on site on Monday, I pointed out the Victorian terraces facing this. So on one side, we've seen photographs of the gentleman who spoke's bungalow. There's 2 bungalows there. But just going down, it's quite a steep lane, as we all, again, witnessed on Monday. I'm sorry about my raspy voice. It's like this in the mornings at the moment. I think we saw the Victorian terraces that we in Totnes, I think with my Totnes hat on, are very keen to have looked at in terms of the conservation area, which is obviously one of the things that's being discussed at the moment. Aggressively, that is not part of the current conservation area of the town, but it has merits that should qualify. And my concern is what impact this could have on those terraces and on the ability of that area to become part of an extension of what is the current conservation area, because for some reason it's never been included before, but the town council I know is very keen for that to happen. It's been part of the discussion that's happened very recently. And, you know, I just feel that, you know, what the gentleman who spoke, who lives opposite, now obviously, you know, it's always very easy to assume that somebody is kind of being a NIMBY, you know, and I'm not suggesting this man is. You know, what we like to talk about in many places these days is swimbies, which is something wonderful in my backyard, not in my backyard. And I think this site has real potential to be a swimby, something wonderful in the street. But the concerns that have been raised in the past and the concerns that I would raise still is the potential serious overbearingness of this modern design. And I hear what Councillor Abbott says about modern, and I'm not the first person to love modern, but I don't have a problem with it. And I think this could be fine, but I think it's just too big for the site. I think they've dealt with the drainage, they've dealt with the parking, but you know, the way that is a very large property in a very constrained site, I have concerns about. And I also think that, you know, in terms of what we're talking about frequently these days in terms of biodiversity, that site was just full of biodiversity. It might not have been the most beautiful biodiversity, but you know, given time, the nature will take over and make something probably a lot more interesting. But I think for me, this is just too big in that site. I think it's overbearing, and I think it's overmassing of the site. And if somebody wanted to try and build next to it, on either side, on those adjacent, you know, potentially the same thing could happen. I think we could start to find there's a massively overbearing element in this, you know, an old street with medieval walls. None of that's been mentioned. I know somebody said probably the Victorian. I don't know. I have no time to check. But the chances are they could well be medieval walls. There's plenty of medieval walls very similar to that in Totnes. So that's my view.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. Councillor Panel.
I note that the parish council, the town council, I should say, supports, not just has no objection, actually supports the application. I think that's important to listen to what the local town council feels. If we're talking about overbearing, we have the two-story, what apparently appeared to be bungalows from the road, but aren't. They're certainly not the same style of design as the very nice, attractive Victorian houses next to them. And if we look across the road, could you show us the photograph that's come up of that block opposite the Victorian terraces? Because there's the lovely Victorian, and that one, yes. I don't think the impact of the site we're discussing now will be anything as bad as the impact of that one. If we're talking about overbearing and not fitting in with the local vernacular architecture, I think that's a much worse example. I think the applicant's gone a long way to try and address the issues that were raised when the application was turned down last time. Stability is an issue, as we've heard, for building control. That obviously is a concern, but it will have to be dealt with. And I agree with Councillor Abbott that we don't have to build exactly in the same style. I noticed the fenestration are taller vertical windows, which hark back to Victorian practice as well. And I do not feel it's overbearing. I think it's set back. I think it's the right scale for use of that site, and it's good to have a site that's not being used, provide housing, and I'm prepared to move that we approve this application.
Thank you, Councillor Panel. We have a number of other people who have indicated. Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with much of what Councillor Panel has just said. I do have serious concerns about the drainage issue. I have personal experience of a pumped sewage system and two pumped sewage systems indeed, because the first one failed completely, leaving me in the difficult and expensive position of having to replace it with the second one. I replaced the Skoda of pumped sewage systems with the Rolls-Royce of pumped sewage systems, and the gentleman is coming out to fix it for the third time this year next week. So I think I would perhaps go a slight step further than Mr. Weimer and say that last resort is putting it mildly. So on that aside, and there are all, if you spend the money, there are always solutions to these things. But that aside, I concur with Councillor Panel. I think the design relative to the site, I don't have a problem with. I think it's important. Again, picking up on what Councillor Abbott said, that our times speak to former times, and that the very lovely Victorian dwellings opposite sort of deserve a response, and I wouldn't say this is necessarily the best response that our times could make, but I think it's a decent one. Thank you.
Councillor Eadie.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be brief. I think I do agree with Councillor Panel, and much of what's been said. We've been presented with a scheme that has been, for me, thoroughly addressed most of the points by the housing officer, the planning officer here, and I think that fundamentally the issues that have been raised have been addressed. Stability, for example, we've covered off the responsibility we have with that. When it comes to sewage, well, that's going to be the responsibility of the owner to resolve in the event that that doesn't work, but it's not for us, I believe, to make a judgment upon. It's completely subjective about the nature of what buildings look like, and I think depending on your perspective, you may see it's actually been a very beautiful property, some may see it not. As you pointed out, times change with whatever, however, what is in vogue at the time. I think you have the town and parish can support there, and for me, I would support this project. Thank you.
Councillor Eadie, you're saying you would support this project because Councillor Panels have moved approval. Are you seconding?
Yeah, I am, yes. Seconding.
Thank you. Councillor O'Callaghan.
Thank you. It's a kind of question which I probably should have asked earlier, but just going along the theme of potentially overlooking and overbearing on that theme, in the report on page 42, it talks about the recommending distances between developments, and the report says that the recommended minimum for three-storey buildings is 28 metres, but that's residential extensions and not new development. So, and in this case, it's I think we were told 17 metres, which is quite a big difference. Although we were also told it sort of technically faces in between a gap between existing buildings. Over 17 and 28 is quite a big shift. But can I ask, having said that, why the recommended distances are just for residential extensions and not new development? and what the recommendation is for new development, please.
Chairman, I would still apply similar distances on a modern estate layout, and I believe my fellow officers would do the same. So I wouldn't just apply it for extensions. This is, the similar. We're still seeking privacy for modern estates as indeed extensions. Here, as I said in the presentation, the reason we are accepting reduced distances is for various reasons. The 21 and 28 metre distances, as I explained, and it's set out in the SPD and shown with sort of diagrams and so on, those distances are normally applied in sort of back-to-back relationships, where the back of one dwelling backs onto another. And it's about providing the privacy to rear gardens and rear windows predominantly. Here, as I explained, the issue, the relationship is a front-to-front relationship. The fronts of the properties, the existing properties, are already in the public domain. So there is a question in the view of officers as to how much privacy those properties we should be protecting. They are already overlooked from the street. They are not private in the same way that someone's rear garden are. So we wouldn't apply the 21 and 28 metre distances religiously. Again, if you look at this relationship here on the block plan, the properties opposite are either side of our plot. Our plot looks at the gap between them. And again, the orientation of the properties are not facing each other. Number one, Garfield Terrace is facing away, and number two, Magdalen Cottages is again offset. So, as I say, in terms of those properties, we feel the reduced distance is appropriate and still consistent with policies Dev 1 and Dev 2. I explained also the properties to the north, Ashley and Crosswinds. We would seek to protect their amenities because we're looking at the rear gardens of those properties, but the officer's recommendation is subject to a boundary treatment condition, and we would be requiring some form of fence or screening to the rear boundary of the proposed plot to provide for reasonable privacy as we would between any opposing properties. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Councillor Cannon, you happy with that?
Yeah, only to note that it does say the distance should be increased to 28 metres, particularly when more of the buildings are 3 stories in height, or there is a drop in levels. And the new building proposes 3 stories in height, and it rises up above the Magdalen Cottages, which look like, as we've discussed, look like quite low down in the front, but obviously are have multiple stories at the back, but nevertheless at the front, across from this proposed development, they are quite set down quite low. So it's a combination of the distance and the height, I guess, that makes it potentially overbearing, or could be perceived that way. Okay, thank you anyway.
Councillor Abbott.
Could I just have a bit of clarification again, please? I should have perhaps pursued this a little earlier. Just on the interrelationship between us as the planning permission and that for building control, and the role of the professional, I accept, I'll be very happy in that process, but they give permission, or they just make a statement, and then that comes back to us, so we know that it's that the statement is that the inspection has happened, and that we're sure that everything is fine. Is it complete?
Yeah, condition 3 requires no development to take place until the site and surrounding land have been stabilised in accordance with a detailed slope stabilisation scheme carried out by a competent person. And then a copy of the slope stabilisation scheme and confirmation from the competent person that the site and surrounding area has been sufficiently stabilised shall be submitted to the local planning authority prior to commencement of any other works on the site. So we are expecting the site to be properly stabilised before the construction of the dwelling can take place. But we are not asking to review the detail or rubber stamp it. We are basically trusting that it will be carried out by a competent person and that we will receive a report from a structural engineer or such like to that effect.
So it's a professional. Be with you in a second. Because you believe it.
Just to clarify my view on this, if we received, and I will pick on the agent, because if we received a report signed from the current agent, we would go back and saying, we don't believe you've got the qualifications to provide us with this report. It needs to come from a structural engineer or a civil engineer or someone who we would recognise as being a competent person to do that report. So it wouldn't be a case of the applicant, unless the applicant is a structural engineer, drafting out something and sending it to us. We would have to be sure that it was someone who was competent in that field to be able to deliver the information to us, if that helps to clarify it.
No.
Councillor Carson.
I'm sorry. It's not once, I understand that the engineer will give a plan and it will be signed off, but once the work has started, who signs it off with building regulations that work is to a standard and the house isn't going to slide down the hill?
Well, there's two. I see it as two completely almost separate things, because my understanding of the condition that Mr. Whitehead just read out, and I'm sure he'll throw something at me if I've got this wrong, is that prior to any other works taking place on site, that we have to have sight of what they're going to do or what they've done, and that then has to be done before any work starts. So whether that stabilisation works falls within building control or not will depend on what works are carried out. But the works that then are undertaken to the dwelling would be required to get consent under building regulations.
And then we sign that off?
Not necessarily, because under building regulations, you don't have to use local authority building control. You can use approved inspectors. So it has to be signed off by an approved building regulations inspector, but doesn't necessarily have to be signed off by local authority building control, because it's, for want of a better phrase, an open market on who you go to for building control. So my understanding is, unless it's retrospective works that have to come to a local authority, I believe they can go to any approved inspector or the local authority. So it'd be wrong for me to suggest it would have to come to us to be signed off.
Councillor Carson, are you happy with that explanation? Thank you. Councillor Steele.
Yes. So it does boggle the mind somewhat in terms of how this can be built. You know, in terms of trying to get huge earthworks and pile drivers down that little tiny lane that we barely struggle to get down in our cars. But I guess that's not part of the scope. But who oversees, you know, that road would need to be closed, I imagine. There'll be a lot of dust, noise, etc. How is the building, the construction overseen?
Two things. There was a construction management plan condition recommended.
Yeah.
And it'll be, I'm assuming it's a public highway, and therefore it'll be Devon County Council who would be responsible for authorising or otherwise the road closures. It's something that County Highways would be responsible for.
Okay, and they haven't commented on that. They've just said they're happy with the.
I don't think I have ever seen
they don't.
an objection from any highways authority where I've worked at any point saying we object because this could only be constructed because of a road closure, because they've got their own process to go through around road closures, and I don't believe that would form part of a reason for refusal for a planning application. You're right, it would then be left to the applicant, the developer, to negotiate with County Highways, and it may be that they can't, if it does need to be closed for a long period, it may be they have to close it for 2 or 3 shorter periods, because different counties have different guidelines on how long they close the road for.
Thank you. Any other comments to be made on this application? We have the proposal for the officer of the recommendation of conditional approval that has been put for approval and seconded. Mr. Weimer?
Just hearing some of the concerns around the stability concern. We could revise the condition to ask to have sight of, and therefore approve what's in front of us. Where we would struggle is we would then have to go to another competent person to look at it, because we haven't got any, we wouldn't have any in-house expertise to sign that condition off. But if members wanted to have details in front of us first to be signed off by an independent third party to look at it, make sure it's okay, then you could consider that. But it isn't something we would normally do, because you would normally expect that a structural engineer that's put their name to a report saying this does the job, if they're a qualified person, you should be able to take that as read, in my opinion. Because if not, they shouldn't be putting their name to it. And if something goes wrong, it's in many ways, their responsibility.
Councillor Allen, you wish to make a point?
Yes, I think we would appreciate that. I think the biggest concern about this, the sort of as a peace of mind aspect of this, because as you know, there's been road slips and all sorts of issues up on this road. So also for the neighbour to live across the road, it'd be good to have as much confirmation as possible that we're really all over the stability issue. Thank you.
So just to clarify, we're looking at a pre-commencement condition for the stabilisation work, details of the stabilisation works to come in?
You okay?
Okay. Pre-commencement conditions have to be agreed by the applicant before they're imposed on a decision. Can I ask for a 5-minute adjournment so we can have that conversation with the agent? Because if not, we could be in a position where we want to issue a decision, they don't agree, and it comes back next time for the debate again. So I'd much rather, if we can have a quick adjournment, simply to have a conversation around whether they're happy with that pre-commencement condition, because we're tied up by it.
Members, I'm sure as this is a point that's been raised, I think if we take 5 minutes quick break for this discussion to be held before we move on.
We can have a 10-minute break after this.
We can have a 10-minute break after this application is decided. Thank you.
I ask why we've got two sets of documents for this? Yeah. Yeah, okay. But I mean, I would have thought that some reference could have been made to what we're actually meant to be approving. Well, there's two sets of documents. No, I'm just asking a question. It's not relevant to the decision. I'm just asking a simple question.
Councillor Hodgson, the ones that come under the previous officer, I think Catherine Miller-Bassey, was never approved.
It's still the same application number.
It's there for reference then?
Yeah.
I've never seen this before in 13 years of being on planning, that you get two lots of documents.
With the greatest respect, we've done it before, but you possibly haven't realised it. So if we have an application, generally speaking, if we have an application that's deferred from an earlier meeting, we will normally put that report back on the agenda with an update, and most of the times updates are relatively short with addendum at the top. But because this has moved on quite a bit, it was felt that we needed to do a new report, but we wanted to keep the original one because that's what was in front of committee for this specific application. So it is for reference.
Right, committee members, we will come back. Mr. Weimer, if you can update us, please.
Yes, I confirm that the applicant has agreed with is in agreement to have a pre-commencement condition as amended to include the report to come to the authority, to come to this authority for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Nix.
It says on the plans it's a flat roof, that it's covered in green. Is there any look to sort of include the biodiversity and stuff to extend that to have a green roof?
If I'm understanding correctly, this is the amenity space. This is a roof terrace above the property that I'm not sure constructionally whether that could be a green roof, but it'll be walked on. It'll be the amenity space, so it won't be left for biodiversity, I'm afraid. And there is scope for limited scope for the sort of landscaping around the edge, which will be subject to a condition. I think that's referenced in the report, providing some biodiversity enhancement or providing some scope for biodiversity to be retained on site. But yeah, the house itself will be a terraced roof, will be a hard surface of some kind, I'm presuming. And the other part is the glazed roof, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Right. Thank. Can we now move to the vote, please? We have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation, which is conditional approval. Can I have a show of hands, please?
Just to be clear, subject to the amended.
Subject to the amended condition. Okay. Thank you. Can we have a show of hands, please? Those against? Any abstentions?
Chair, that is 9 for and 2 abstentions.
That application is therefore approved. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Thank you for members of the public who have attended today. And we'll just have a changeover of officers before we move on to the next application. Okay, some people I know took a break, others didn't, so I will allow members to have a short break, please. Thank you.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, everybody. We will commence again. Move on to agenda item 6C, which is 392823 HHO, which is Eldoret Gampton Cross. Case officer is Alexis Wilson. The recommendation is refusal. If I can move on to Ms. Wilson, please, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the site we're looking at is at Gampton Cross. There's 4 properties in the row, and it's the one to the left inside that red box. So here we've got it from an aerial shot. So I think, as we were discussing on the site visit on Monday, in my opinion, the location of the site is quite key to understanding the acceptability of any scheme in terms of the design and the scale mass. So I'm going to start by giving a visual overview of the setting. So as you can see, Eldoret's in a very open landscape, low hedge lines, little tree cover. Add to this the topography of the site. It's highly visible from not just within the local area, but also further afield. So the result of the position is it's highly visible. And to give you an understanding, I've taken some photographs from different points in the public realm surrounding. So this is the property from the adjacent crossroads. As you can see, it sits quite high up. If we go back along the road, so this is with Gampton Hope Cove behind us, looking towards if you progress along to the A381. So we're about 80 metres away in this photograph. Here we're about 150 metres distance. This is the road in from Marlborough towards Southwish. Further away still, forgive the quality of my photograph, but we're looking back now from the gateway to Withymoor Farm, which is about 800 metres away as the crow flies. So you can see the property even at that sort of distance. And here we are 1.8 kilometres away. You can see it with our eyesight, naked eye. That's from Outer Hope. So it's just to sort of give an understanding of the setting. It's a highly visible site, and therefore any design needs to sort of take this into account, whereas if it was in a more built up, less visible environment, maybe the design would be less important. So the proposal is to remove a number of lean-to outbuildings and construct a single-storey rear and side extension. So the extension is edged in blue to the right, top right of the property here. So we're also raising the roof of the garage, creating a first floor terrace on top to be accessed from the first floor rooms. The extension measures 74 metres square footprint, give or take. That's leaving out the sort of overhangs that are there. Comes out 8 metres approximately off the rear wall of the house, 10 metres in width, and sits at 6.2 metres in height to the ridge. So we're going to have a look at the proposed elevations in the next few slides. So this is the west elevation, which is the front. So there's 2 elevations which front onto highways. This is one of them. So to the left of the property, you can see the extension. The garage roof is being raised 1 metre, and then behind that is sitting the bulk of the extension, which comes out to the side and goes to the rear. So it comes off that wall of the house, 4.5 metres, and you can see it's got various skylights and windows in that elevation. Behind that roof of the front of the garage is a raised terrace area. This is looking from the rear, from where its closest neighbour is. So the extension is that building to the right with the long, wide window there. This is the north elevation into the garden. So you can see from this the raised terrace and the new patio doors that are coming onto the top of that garage. And then to the left is the extension. And then this is the other highway adjacent elevation. So key issues surrounding why I am recommending refusal. So as we've seen, the location is highly visible. Got low hedgerows, lack of tree cover, rural location, the topography of the site, and it's also close proximity to a number of public highways. Second point, the extension I consider to be overbearing on the main property. So when we're looking at the proposal in terms of scale and mass, we're looking, as it's a countryside location, at policy TTB 29. So policy TTB 29 supports extensions in the countryside, permitting that the extension is appropriate in scale and design in context of the setting. The supplementary planning document defines appropriate scale as not increasing the internal floor space by more than 50%. In this case, the footprint of the extension is pretty much exactly 50% at 74 metres squared. So in terms of scale and design, it is pushing the boundaries of that, but it's not over. However, if you add the height of the proposed extension to this, that increases the impact. So a previous application for a 2-storey extension on the same site was withdrawn when officers stated the height was unacceptable. The new application that's come in has been described as single storey, but it's only actually 300 millimetres lower than the previous application. So the ridge height is 6.2 metres in height, compared to an average single storey dwelling in the UK, which is between 3 and 4.5 metres. So the 6.2 metre height for a single storey extension is considered excessive. The ridge is so high, in fact, that it sits a metre above the eaves of the host property, despite being single storey. So the overall design is given a perception of being a 2-storey extension. The height, the scale and the mass result in the extension appearing overbearing, not respecting the primacy of the host, and perception of a 2-storey side and rear extension. Secondly, it's considered that the design is inharmonious in terms of the property that's there. So we're looking at DEV 20 and DEV 23 and local planning neighbourhood plan policy SHHBE3 to look at guidance on what's acceptable in terms of design. So we're looking at the materials should match the existing property, the shape and pitch of the roofs should mirror the original home, and the windows and should provide a unified exterior and reflect the proportion, the shape and materials of those existing in the parent property. So we can see that the roof pitch differs from the host, especially when viewed from the front. The windows differ in terms of scale and size, not just to the host, but across the extension itself, with 2 different sizes of roof light and 4 different styles of windows. We've got tall, narrow ones to the front, we've got wide and narrow to the rear, we've got standard height patio windows, and we've got floor-to-ceiling glazing in the north elevation. Overall, it gives the scheme a feeling of being inharmonious. In addition to the shape and size of the fenestration, the amount of glazing is also considered problematic. So the landscape that the site is set in is in the South Devon National Landscape, which is protected dark skies area. So if we're looking at the area, we're looking to the South Devon Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Management Plan, and that states that tranquility and natural nightscapes and dark skies of the AONB must be enhanced and maintained by development. DEV 25 of our local plan requires that development is designed to prevent the impacts of light pollution from artificial light. And then we've got ENV 8 of the South Region Neighbourhood Plan, which states that use of a high proportion of glass in walls and roofs will be discouraged. The amount of glazing comes to approximately 50 metres squared and includes a large number of roof lights and a wall of glass extended to 6 metres in height on the north elevation. My main concern is that given the highly visible location and the lack of surrounding built form or tree cover, the extension could emit a large degree of artificial light within this dark landscape, and has the potential to become a bit of a beacon in the landscape. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on your last discussion of the glazing and the light. I mean, all 4 dark skies. I'm just wondering though, I mean, this elevation, which seems to account for quite a lot of the additional glass, is facing in. Oh, we've gone away from it now.
Yeah, so that's
the
the
north
front,
elevation
yeah.
is facing into the sort of small wooded area, which I presume is the applicant's property as well, where we parked. So, I mean, this glass isn't. I'm not saying it's not. It wouldn't be emitting light, but it's not sort of shining out across the broader landscape, particularly, is it?
I believe it is compared to what's there at the present, and we've also got a number of roof lights, and this elevation as well has quite a good degree of glass, and that is to the highway, and that is facing out.
Sorry, yeah, I agree. I was specifically talking about the north elevation. I agree with you on this one, but this one, I think, I mean, is relatively well screened. I would have said. Look, it was just being
more so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Panel?
Yeah, just for the benefit of those who weren't at the site visit, it's described as a single-storey building, but from a question I asked on Monday, it seems that if it was constructed in that manner, there would be nothing to prevent a second storey being inserted at some time if the owners so wished. So it could become a two-storey building.
I think that's absolutely correct, Councillor. If you have you don't need planning permission for internal work. So if you had a building that had a sufficient headroom to put a mezzanine floor on a domestic setting, provided there's no change of use and it's still a single dwelling house, then that wouldn't require planning permission.
Councillor Eadie.
Hello. Just on that point, in the event they had included a second floor within the scheme, that would that have any bearing on our decision that we have to make today?
My view is that I don't think the possibility of internal works to create a second floor, I don't think that should be part of your deliberations, but what your deliberations clearly should be, and as the case officers clearly set out, the concerns around the overall scale, mass, design of what's in front of us. So it's not so much about they could put a second floor in it, it's about whether you think the scale and mass and design of that building is appropriate.
Yeah, and that's my thinking too. Can I come back to the glazing, because we discussed this on site as well, and it to calculate to understand how this calculation is made, or how the judgment is made on glazing and light pollution. Is there are some metrics that your guidance that inform us, correct? How just to understand better, how does that how do you make that judgment, or how do we understand the calculations that are being made in this case?
So I think with any design, trying to look at you and look at with any design, we're looking at where its location is. So in particular, because this is in a very visible position and it's set up high and it's within the countryside, we have to then take a pragmatic view on how we feel that amount of glazing, as opposed to if it was set in the centre of a town which had street lighting and other buildings surrounding it and car headlights and that sort of thing, it would be much less impactful. So it really is a case-by-case definition of how much impact we feel that would have. And especially with things like roof lights, they're quite hard to screen. You don't put a curtain closed, and when there's a light on in the room, it's always emitting upwards. So it's a sort of case-by-case basis to do with the location, a lot of it. And certainly I believe that the residences in Hope Cove don't have street lighting, because that's something that's been limited to protect those dark skies. So it is a very dark environment there where this is set.
I guess I suppose so. There's no sort of formal measurement that's taken in these.
No, there's no formal measurement. It really is a site by site.
And in this particular aspect, as was raised by Councillor Rake, this is actually less intrusive by way of visibility from other perspectives approaching the building, by virtue that there's a lot of vegetation, there are trees, there's their own garden that sits on this side of that elevation of the building. It is the other side that
so direct line of sight, it is still going to create a glow.
I'm sure, yeah.
But direct line of sight, yes, this is the least impactful side for certain.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions of the officer's report? If there are not, then we'll move on. We do not have an objector. We have the supporter, Mr. Brooks. If you'd like to come up, you've got 3 minutes from when you settle down. And if you'd like to switch on your microphone, that's it. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for your time for this meeting. This application follows a previous withdrawn application where we were advised by the planning officer at that time that the maximum floor area of any potential extension would be no greater than 68 metres square. And as far as I'm aware, the submitted design is 66 square metres. So obviously it falls below this. The proposed extension replaces 105 square metres of existing outbuildings that are derelict and unsightly and in pretty poor condition. The eaves to the south elevation are the same height as the existing small single-storey extension that gives continuity and from our point of view and the design looks correct with the other existing roof pitches. The ridge of the proposed extension is 600mm lower than the neighbouring property to the east, and it also gives continuity of the stepped roof lines of the three properties to the east when viewed from Burley Lane to the south. The eaves of the proposed extension are 1.5 metres lower than the neighbouring dwelling to the east. The Eldoret property it doesn't look like it from the road, but it actually sits 1.5 metres lower than the next door property. The existing outbuildings are in a very poor state and are built up to the eastern boundary. The proposed extension is set back from that boundary by 6 metres and is 9 metres away from the nearest dwelling. So there are no issues with being overshadowing or overbearing. The extension gable to the north is certainly not on the principal elevation and will not easily be seen from any public highway, and has been designed to take into the views to obviously our large garden. And this elevation will form the main entrance to the dwelling. The sky at night pollution, we agree, obviously needs to be controlled, and there are a number of glazing systems that can control the solar gain as well as the light emittance, etc., etc. But we've carefully designed the roof light, and it doesn't really show it in the drawings, but the actual roof overhangs the main windows by 1 metre on both the north and the south elevation. So that will obviously reduce some light emittance, etc. The roof terrace has been designed to ensure that it doesn't overlook any neighbouring properties, and it again faces the garden so that we can actually see the garden. And the west of the proposed roof terrace has been carefully disguised to match the dwelling by using a small parapet roof and balustrade instead of glazing.
Mr. Brooks, do you have much more?
I've got 30 seconds. Okay. With regard to our property, it's sort of been brought up in a couple of planning things that it shouldn't be painted orange, and it's been painted orange for approximately 60 years. And I agree, due to its prominent position and also the fact that it is painted orange, it's sort of quite noticeable. But the feedback was that we should actually keep it orange. So we talked about painting it blue or green or something else, but most of our community wanted it to remain orange.
Mr. Brooks, that's not before us today. The colour you paint it is not up to this planning application. Thank you.
Also, there is a 20-foot high hedgerow bank along the boundary with Burley Lane, which would make it what we're seeing on this slide. You wouldn't see any of the extension from Burley Lane. In fact, the only place you would see this side of the extension is if from Whittemore Farm, where Alexis has taken that picture from. I certainly agree from everywhere else. Certainly to the west, Eldoret is quite prominent, but the extension is designed so that it is virtually invisible.
Mr. Brooks, I'll have to pull you to a close, but I'm sure members may have questions of you. Thank you for that. Any questions of Mr. Brooks? Councillor Panel?
Yes, I just wonder if you could explain why you want the extension to be so high when it's only a single story. That is obviously one of the main objections from the planning officer. I wonder if you could give us some explanation.
Sorry, when you look from the west, the reason that we would want it so high is, one, I'm quite a tall person, and I'd rather not just have a small flat roof if possible. I'd like to have a sort of a galleried ceiling if possible, and obviously the windows in it are to let in light. Basically, it will prominently be our sort of kitchen. My wife has been nagging me for the last 5 years to get a new kitchen, and this is the way that we're hopefully going to do it.
Any other questions of Mr. Brooks? Councillor Abbott.
Hi. Have you had any thoughts about how to address the dark skies issue?
We would certainly have blinds on you can have electric blinds on the roof lights in the extension, which we would use, but to be fair, as a kitchen, it's not going to be where we're going to be spending most of the time at night anyway. But we would have blinds to have that. The window on the west side is quite low level. It's almost ground level, where you were sort of stood up looking at the property from the west, from the east. Then that window will be almost on the sort of ground level, so it wouldn't be overlooking or seeing the neighbour's house. If that makes sense.
You're not using obscure glass anywhere?
I don't think there's any...
Or tinted?
No. I don't think there's any necessity to use tinted glass.
Any other questions of Mr. Brooks? If there aren't, Ms. Brooks, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'll move on now to board members. Councillor Dennis. This is a statement from South Hewish Parish Council.
Thank you, Chair. South Hewish Parish Council regret they are unable to attend in person to support the applicant. South Hewish Parish Council met and discussed this application on the 16th of January 2024. Following consideration, the councillors were unanimous, aside from one abstention, in that there were no material issues with the plans other than a request for low emission glass to be used to ensure our dark skies remained protected. We would fully encourage South Hams District Council to approve this application as submitted by the applicant, and will request a condition to be added regarding the glass requirement. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Obviously no ability to question that. So we'll move on to Councillor Dennis. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for their time today. I Well, as Alexis stated at the start, in her opinion, the location is really important to this question, and so just want to thank all those members that were able to make the site visit on Monday. I obviously called this in to seek your views on the design, height and scale of the extension and whether it is contrary to the policies listed, and also to consider the extent to which the glazing would impact on the dark night skies. And the only other thing is just to draw your attention to the representations that obviously we've heard from the parish council and also the neighbours of the property. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
Any questions of Councillor Dennis? Councillor Abbott.
Do you have any perception about the way the dark skies work in your area? Are there points of light pollution? Is there an assessment? How is the assessment made of the dark skies? Do you know? Maybe I'll ask.
There's obviously a neighbourhood plan, and obviously dark skies is a hugely important part of that. But I've seen in other developments that have happened that there are obviously conditions put on about the type of glazing, that's installed, which tends to negate that issue. Yeah, as you say, it's probably a question elsewhere.
Any other questions of Councillor Dennis? If no, thank you. We will now move into the debate unless you wish to raise the question you've asked with the officer. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Sorry, out of sequence. Hadn't thought of it before. I wonder, do you have an opinion on the way dark skies are assessed and their effectiveness in this area? Is it complete and so on? Thank you.
I'm probably going to fudge it a little bit because do I know exactly how the neighbourhood plan group assessed? Because my understanding is it's a clear policy within the neighbourhood plan, a made neighbourhood plan about dark skies. How they actually did that, I would be surprised if they went out with light meters to work out exactly where the boundary is. I think similar to looking at design of either new buildings, extensions, whatever. Look at design. It's a balanced view that I think an individual can take. So if you are living in a particular parish and you're doing a neighbourhood plan, I think you have a almost a feeling as to what areas in the patch you live in are inherently dark skies and which ones aren't. I don't think I'm not aware of any metric you have to go through to say that the lumens have to be below a certain level to qualify for dark skies. But my impression when the few times I've driven in at night around that part of Southampton, that there are certain large settlements that are lit. There are other settlements that aren't lit, and generally speaking, it does feel relatively dark on that coastal patch. So, but I don't think I can't point you to an empirical measurement to say, oh, it's below a certain light level, therefore it's a dark sky. But a lot of it must come from perception of the neighbourhood plan group who did the neighbourhood plan, and I'm not aware that there was a significant amount of objection to the neighbourhood plan on the basis that, oh no, it's not a dark sky. So no, I'm sorry, I can't help you more than that, Councillor.
Councillor Abbott, if I may, as a ward member.
Oh yeah, it was just to say that within the neighbourhood plan itself, it doesn't specify. It just says in N8 the use of a high proportion of glass in walls and roofs will be discouraged. So a high proportion, again, is a judgment to me. This is a high proportion.
I think Councillor Abbott, I think when I've seen them looking at other applications, they're looking at sort of excessive glazing, excessive light spill, and external lighting as well. So they're looking at the cumulative effect of them, and that's how they've responded. And I think that's where that comes from in the neighbourhood plan, because when you come through, it is a very dark area because of the lack of street lighting as well. Councillor Eadie? Alan first.
Thank you. I was just going to. We've got a meeting of the National Landscape Board tomorrow. If, maybe that's a question I can ask them about how we assess dark skies, and it would be an interesting one for planning committee. I'd have thought. Happy to.
Councillor Eady.
Yeah, I mean, having visited and having seen this scheme and discussed it, I believe actually the case officer has done an appropriate job, a very good job, I should say. Sorry, in so much as having to assess this in what clearly are uncertain ways of measuring when it comes to light pollution. We can only deal with what we've been presented. We've been told that it's because it'll be used as a kitchen. It is an enormous amount of massing for that. It is an enormous amount of light, a glazing for that. And for me, on the basis of what's been presented, I would support what's been recommended by the case officer. It would sort of strike me that another scheme would work. Because it is a area of land that, or the outbuildings are essentially derelict, and it is appropriate for some sort of development. But for me, based on what we've been presented and what's been applied for, I would approve. I don't know how does the terminology work. I support what the case
I'll
officer says.
second it if that's a motion.
Recommend
Yeah,
for
I
refusal.
second that if that's. If you're moving it, I'll second.
So, Councillor Eady, you
I
are.
would say I move to oppose it. Right, thank you very much.
So you're moving the refusal, the officer's recommendation, and we have a second from Councillor Callaghan?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor Hodgson? Or comments?
I think
We're debating, yes.
No, it's
yes.
not a question. This is in a national landscape. This proposal breaches a number of our policies as has been set out. There's clearly room for an extension at this building, but I don't think this is the right one. And it's overly dominant, it's too tall. I'm sure that another proposal could come forward that would provide the much wanted kitchen that would be more subservient to the main building. It's not long ago that we refused an application for a building in a prominent site that incorporated a 13% increase in fenestration. I would say that's a much bigger increase than 13% on the existing building, and I think that's a really key issue. And it's not only the dark skies that's an issue. Even if you put in blinds to restrict the emission of light, on sunny days you're still going to get a lot of reflection from the windows, and that will be seen from a very long way as well. And I think because of its conspicuous position, because of the height and the amount of windows, that I would support the officer's proposal to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Obviously, what we're looking at is the north elevation. So this isn't about improving passive house options or passive solar coming into the house, because obviously it's facing the wrong direction. So it is all about kind of just the light, which is fair enough. Into what a lot of older houses do feel fairly dark. But I think for me, it's not just about the actual light spill out into the wider area, which I absolutely support, because I think it's a very important part of our heritage is to have our dark skies and enjoyment of, etc. But secondly, it's the jarring of the design. For me, the fact that it's coming up above that ridge, above the eaves, and the ridge of the new is above the eaves of the old, starts to conflict with some of that property on the right. The original property is part of heritage actually of quite a lot of very similar properties in the area. And I mean, it might not be everybody's favourite, and they are quite sort of solid, funny old buildings. But I think there's ways of actually making much better of them than what feels to me with this. It's kind of jarring with it, and I think it could be a lot more interesting to have a kind of a modern extension that has various ways of blending much better with that building. And I think part of it is scale, part of it is the size of the fenestration, and it's also just about somehow fitting in better. And I think there's going back to the drawing board wouldn't be a bad thing for this. So I support the refusal, And as I say, it's against a number of our policies anyway, but it also is against some of the neighbourhood plan policies of the local area. And it's difficult because, you know, the South Hewish Parish Council obviously is quite happy with it, and they're supporting it, which is good. But it's actually, I think, something better on this site would be much better for the area and probably better for the house itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Any other comments? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. I actually quite like this one. And I think there's... I completely concur with Councillor Eadie that the officer's report exceeds our usual high standard. I think it's a very good report, but there's a lot I also disagree with. I mean, although it's very visible, it's also sort of in the intimate and immediate vicinity. It's quite well hidden to the north and to the south by the wooded area and a large hedge. And to the west, as the applicant stated, it's been designed to be less impactful, and then to the east it backs onto other properties in a way. So I'm not convinced. I won't go as far as to say I disagree with the officer, but I'm not convinced by the argument. And of course, you know that its impact is that overbearing, and you never see it all at once, of course, because it's variously masked by either bits of landscape or bits of vegetation or the host house itself. That said, I am concerned about the amount of additional glazing, and I think that's my principal concern. And given that the rest I find to be very finely balanced, on that basis, I would actually support the motion currently before us. But I'm on a knife edge with this one.
Thank you, Councillor Rake. Councillor Allen first. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a bit tricky talking about design because one person's lovely building is another person's aberration, as Prince Charles used to say. For me, it's very much about glazing. I mean, the conversation that comes up in national landscape all the time is about dark skies and the real problem and impact of too much glazing. I think it's also very close to the undeveloped coast, which again, it needs protecting. It's undeveloped. It's nominated for a reason, and a lot of that is a problem with dark skies and with too glaring and obvious buildings. I mean, I think, as a lot of other people have said, if this was scaled down and some of the glazing was removed, it would still be a great new extension for a building, a fantastic new kitchen. It's just enormous, and there's too many lights, too many windows. So my recommendation would also go with Councillor Eadie's proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Steele.
Thank you. Actually, just a question about low emission glazing, because I guess the parish had said they'd approve it if there was low emission glazing, but as I understand, low emission glazing is about heat, not light. So it's designed more to stop heat escaping rather than light. Is that your understanding? Does it really make a difference on the light side?
I think mainly it is to do with heat, but it can have a screen put on it or a film put on it that lessens the emissions. But if you're looking at, even if you lessened it by 20%, and you've got 50 metres of glaze in there, you've still essentially got 40 metres of glaze in there. So it's a limitation. It can reduce it to a degree, but obviously it's still there.
Thank you.
And can I just point out that's not what's in front of us. That's not what's in front of us. Is not on the plans, and I think it's in respect to a question from Councillor Abbott. The applicant said, no, I'm not proposing any low emission. I don't think he used that word, but what? No change. Yeah. So I think we would need to consider the application in front of us without consideration of putting that condition on.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Just for completeness, really, when we're talking about reflection of the light from all of this glazing, on the north side, there will be some reflection, but that's not where the sun is, so it's principally less of an issue. And I thought the report was very comprehensive, thank you, but I think that some of the views from a long way away were, you know, there are houses around, and I'm not sure that to say that if one searches out that one can see a house in the distance, that therefore it's, well, the house is there anyway, actually. And from one of the directions, the extension wouldn't have been visible because it's, I think we were looking from the west. And even on these lower windows on the south elevation, there is a hedge, at least, and I look from the south on the road that's approaching from the south toward, going north towards the building. It appears as though the position of the proposed extension would be obscured by the hedge along the side of the road. Having said all of that, that's just because I think some of the debate may not have stated exactly how I personally interpret the reality of the situation. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott, for, as always, a considered response. Any other comments from members? If not, we have proposed and seconded to accept the the officer's recommendation of refusal, and I will take that now. Can I have a show of hands in support of the officer's recommendation for refusal, please? Those against? Any abstentions? That.
So 10 for and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Therefore, that planning application is refused. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 7, which is the planning appeals update. And can I thank all those who attended the previous application and for the officer as we move over now. Thank you. Mr. Weimer.
Thank you, Chair. I need to apologise. So something didn't go quite 100% with the reports in front of you because there was a couple at the top of the report that weren't shown which ward they're in, and it means there's 2 appeals on the same site that was shown in the correct, one was shown in the correct ward and one was shown in a vacant ward, so apologies for that. I will start off with that one. It's quite, so we're talking about Townsend Cottage, Hightown up Marlborough. 2 applications, both for a balcony. My reading is the difference is one had a post, one was proposing post and wire balustrade or surrounds, and the other one was a post and glass. The inspector considered that, and that the balcony had been provided already. So the paragraph 9 on one of the decisions I think is key, where the inspector says the balcony is visible when travelling on the A381 from the direction of Kingsbridge. It is also visible from a longer distance when travelling on the A road in the opposite direction before the road bends around the ends near the appeal site. The existing balcony is already highly prominent, standing out as a strident feature amongst the surrounding built form, causing material harm to the host building and its surroundings. The proposed alterations would serve to compound these unwelcome effects. Consequently, it would be very much against the grain of the character and appearance of the conservation area. Don't really need to go much further than that to see what the decision was going to be, but that you have to do a balance, don't you? So is there harm to the heritage asset, and is there public benefit that weighs the harm? And the only benefit was private benefit, therefore no public benefit, and the applications have been refused and the appeals are dismissed. I have had a conversation with the case officer this morning, who's had an update from the enforcement officer. My understanding is we haven't taken enforcement action because the balcony has actually been removed already. I think that as soon as they got the refusal, they realised we would take action. So it has been removed. So there'll be no further action from us. But the right response from the applicant, to be perfectly honest. So fair play to them for that. The next one is an allowed appeal. 32A Gallants Quay, Southtown at Dartmouth. I thought you fainted for a minute. You failed. That sneak didn't work. I've had a conversation with the case officer along the lines of this has been allowed, and it's allowed. The inspector considered the key issue was impacting the character and appearance of the conservation area, and made quite a bit of commentary on the Dartmouth conservation area appraisal. And I think there's one paragraph that sums it up. The site, despite its additional mass, bulk and scale, the proposed design would reduce the appeal site's visual prominence and integrate well into its sensitive location. Its overall height would suit the lie of the land and the distinct rhythm of the cascading buildings. It would be modern, but unashamedly so, and utilise an appropriate mix of materials and features which are in use elsewhere in the conservation area. But I think this is really, and if members would like to have a look at the plans online, I think it's an interesting one because this also is relevant to the debate we had on the application at Mongo around an inspector here is clearly saying you've got an unashamedly modern addition here, but that is appropriate because it's the scale, massing and material. So it's not, we shouldn't be saying it's modern, therefore you can't have it in a conservation area. And admittedly, Mongo wasn't in conservation area, but it is down to you can have modern design, but it needs to be appropriate and it needs to have the right materials and it needs to be the right mass and scale. So I found that I have had a look at the plans, and I'll be honest, if I'd been the case officer, I would have recommended refusal as well. So it's one we might need to have a look at. Finally, one that I'm pretty sure was a committee decision. The Parklands, Bayview Estate, Stoke Fleming. The building that I think, and I'm sure Councillor Wright will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the building that's been in relatively slow construction for a number of years.
Right at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Yes, where they came in to have it slightly taller. I'm sure there was a site visit.
Yeah, it was.
And there was a thorough debate, and it was one that's I could see the pros and cons to this. It was a finely balanced decision. The inspector has disagreed with the refusal. Considered that the main issue was the effect on the living conditions of the nearby occupiers, but felt, and has gone into it in some detail, but fundamentally said the change, the additional height and the change to this, even if it is on a plinth, doesn't have a significant additional impact on the neighbouring properties. Therefore, it was allowed. I'm absolutely certain that the much to the disagreement of the neighbours. I think it was approval.
Yeah. So when this first came to committee as a variation application to sort of regularise construction that had already taken place, it was recommended for approval, and the committee opted for refusal instead.
Do you know why we did?
It does have a considerable impact on neighbouring amenity, and whether one believes that's sufficient for refusal or not is obviously a matter of opinion.
I'm not sure that the inspector would agree that it has a considerable impact, but this isn't a decision that I think members got it I don't think the decision was fundamentally flawed. There was an impact on the neighbours. I think the decision you took was a fair and reasonable one to take, but the inspector has come to an alternative conclusion. It certainly isn't one we need to do any forensic examination of how we got to that position. I think it was a fair and reasonable decision for members to take, but the inspector's clearly, it's a relatively lengthy decision, and the inspector's gone through every element, and I think has just basically said, understand where you're coming from, but I don't agree.
Just for clarity, Chair, considerable in the sense of warranting consideration.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Ray. Thank you, Mr. Weimer. I think we've concluded that element of the agenda. Move on to agenda item 8. It's the update on undetermined major applications, and again, this is for sort of noting. And I think if members have any questions, then they put them to the officers concerned to provide any answers or questions on that. And if that is acceptable, I think we have concluded our business today. Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, we had the comms on. Okay. Oh, right. It's to do with the comms we had on the decision on the trees that were cut down on near Hope Cove or in Hope Cove recently. There's a question on that. So is that?
Sorry, I'm going to be really rude and interrupt.
No,
I'm more than happy to take those questions, but because it doesn't relate to anything on the agenda, can we close the meeting first?
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'm more than happy to have a discussion about that.
Thank you, Mr. Weimer. I think that's the case. Councillor Hodgson, is it pertinent to the agenda items, or will it hold till we close the meeting?
It's the agenda item that we're on at the moment, which is
Thank
the
you.
outstanding
Okay.
applications. I just wanted to raise the issue that we're kind of our requirements have changed quite a lot over the last couple of years. And I'm just thinking that this, what we're seeing here is effectively a form of land banking. So, the old standards still apply, or can we, when we kind of do extensions, can we have a condition on that it's actually going to be reviewed under the current requirements, not just because they got outlined or something 4 or 5 years ago and don't have to comply now with our new, biodiversity and climate change requirements. Because I think, there should be not just a free-for-all land banking opportunity, but actually, not penalty, but just, our decisions are being made differently now, and I think that should be reflected in the fact that some of these have been kicking around for years.
Mr. Weimer.
It will depend on not necessarily the individual site, but it will depend on the planning application. So if a site has got an outline consent and they come in for reserve matters to the details, we can't then revisit matters that should be dealt with in outline consent. If, however, it is a full application that has not been determined, then the application should be determined. The application should be determined in accordance with the policy at the time the decision is made.
So, midway down this document, 2379/21/FUL, that was a retrospective application in my ward in Dartington, in Staverton actually, for a car park that was actually developed in 2016 for 100 something cars. When it came through in 2021, the Highways comment was, because of COVID, we actually need the extra parking. So, of course, 2016, the pandemic wasn't on anybody's horizon, I don't think. Might have been on a few, but certainly not nationally. And we're now beyond COVID. So I just feel that, you know, that there's things come through, and I just feel that, you know, that took away a massive amount of biodiversity. You know, it's like 8 years now, 8 years that people have been objecting to this, the parish council completely. And it just feels like we just keep kicking it down the grass, you know, into the long grass. Meanwhile, there's 100 vehicles happily parking and causing absolute chaos on the roads in Staverton. And I'm just pointing out that, you know, why can't we just say no? Perhaps.
I would need to get a specific response from the case officer, and what I'm about to say is going to be deeply unpopular. But if it's a car park and it was done more than 4 years ago, I think it's immune.
I think my point is well illustrated. This is one of the applications that you might remember. We sat in one of the rooms upstairs with one of the case officer that's been gone from here years ago at this stage, and went through all the retrospectives. Are we still online? Yeah. Okay. Riverford has a history of actually doing stuff, then going for retrospective, and this is one of those cases that we looked at the time, and it just seems to me that, you know, we're just being walked all over, and against all the good reasons of good planning.
I take your point. I'll need to have a conversation with the case officer.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Any other points? If not, I will close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.